Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2020 and to your race review for the 2020 Spanish Grand Prix. A race where we saw some great fights in that midfield, a threat of rain on the horizon, lots of different strategies at play, some one stops, some two stops, and even further back, a couple of three stops. Real brave from some of those guys. As always, if you are new around here, feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed today's review. Spoiler warning ahead if you've not seen the Grand Prix, so I would advise you go away, watch the highlights, and then come back to hear the race review. But before we get into the results, let's take a quick look at the starting grid and your qualifying results from Saturday's session. A Mercedes 1-2, a story we're so used to in 2020 qualifying. Lewis Hamilton once again taking pole position, Valtteri Bottas on the front row. Verstappen was third, but it was the return of Sergio Perez alongside him on row 2. His teammate Stroll was in P5. What kind of a start could the two Racing Point and the two Red Bulls, what kind of mischief could they cause on that opening lap? It was the two McLarens on row 4, Leclerc and Gasly row 5. It was then Vettel with those fresh tyre choices. What kind of impact could he have during the Grand Prix? Danny Kvyat, we saw him out in Q1 in the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. Could he spring a surprise again here in Spain? Row 7, Ricciardo, the first of the Renaults, disappointed, but Kimi Raikkonen splitting the two yellow bees. Raikkonen, a great session for the Alfa Romeo driver. Magnussen and Grosjean, the two Haas boys, 16th and 70th. The two Williams cars, Russell Latifi, 18th and 19th. And for the first time in his career, Antonio Giovinazzi, P20. Spoiler warning out of the way, here is your result for the 2020 Spanish Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton took victory, but once again, it was not a Mercedes 1-2. Which I believe we have only seen once this season at the second race at the Styrian Grand Prix, which is a crazy statistic considering their dominance in qualifying, but Valtteri did round off that top 3 in the podium positions, also with the point for fastest lap. Stroll and Perez 4th and 5th, a great day for Racing Point. Carlos Sainz did a great drive at his home Grand Prix, P6 for the Spaniard. Vettel finally picking up some points. He'd been on a bit of a drought, but 6 points today, 7th place in front of Alex Albon, a great drive from Seb. Alex, a difficult day. I want to talk about him in a little bit. Not the best strategy call, but some solid overtakes there and some points, so that's not horrific from Alex Albon. Gasly P9 again scoring points for AlphaTauri and just missed out beating Alex Albon, and Lando Norris held on in those closing stages for the single point in P10. Your bottom half started with Daniel Ricciardo, a really difficult weekend. Kind of epitomised in the fact that they just missed out on points. P11 for Ricciardo, P13 for Esteban Ocon. They had the big boss there this weekend of the Renault company as a group. Not happy with the result. Danny Kvyat, P12, splitting the two Renaults. A strong drive from Kvyat, another great move on the outside of turn 4 in the opening stages of the race. And then we go into this backpack. Raikkonen at the front of that group this time round, P14 for the Finn. Magnussen, Giovinazzi 15 and 16. The two Williams 17 and 18. Romain Grosjean, a quiet race in terms of result, but quite a few incidents today. I want to start there in a moment, but your only DNF from the Spanish Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc, who was actually having quite a strong drive, fighting in and amongst those top 10 in that midfield group. That was so fun to watch today, but ultimately no points for the Monegasque driver. Race breakdown then. This is the fun bit. This is the bit I always enjoy. I think we will start, well, I said I'd start with Grosjean, and we might as well start there. Charles Leclerc DNF'd, and as I just mentioned, had a great fight in that midfield group, and I want to talk about that midfield group because I really enjoyed that, and certainly with the threat of rain on the horizon and with a disappointing fight at the front, it really was that midfield fight which kept this race alive a little bit. And you guys all know I'm a sucker for a fight in that midfield. So many different cars fighting for those positions, we had penalties, so overall I didn't think it was as bad as a lot of people were saying. But it would be great to have some kind of spiciness at the front as well as in that midfield pack. But Romain Grosjean, the last of our finishers, P19, a tricky day. To what looked to be a promising weekend as well at the start of the weekend. He was 6th and 5th in the opening 2 practice sessions. The team with Magnussen as well seemed like they'd found a bit of mojo this weekend. They had a great race here last year, and it kind of seemed like one of those one-off races where a team is just incredible, picks up a double points finish, and they're comfortable for the rest of the year. But I was really kidding myself. Both out in Q1, Grosjean, who looked comfortably in front of K-Mag, behind Kevin in qualifying. In the race, Magnussen jumped up to 13th, like he seems to do every single race this season. Grosjean, I think, went backwards one place. Nothing too much to shout about. And for Haas, they tried different strategies. K-Mag was on the soft, Grosjean on the medium, and pretty much all of those back three teams with Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams tried a similar thing, all splitting strategies, all doing crazy things. A couple of them, I think Raikkonen and Russell doing a 3-stop. Grosjean went so long on that first stint trying to do a 1-stop, but in that did some questionable defending again, blocking Kimi Raikkonen on the straight. Kimi Raikkonen really not happy with his former teammate. Grosjean then went for a little spin late on, had to then do a 2-stop, and that really didn't help him out. Not that he was in a great position anyway. And we spoke about Romain before. He's certainly a driver that rides on emotions. And in Hungary, cast your minds back to the third race of the season, he was slated quite heavy for not defending enough. The team did a great strategy with Magnussen and Grosjean at the start of that race, but it was Grosjean who lost out, and people said, you've got to be more aggressive on your defending. And I think he's just taken that criticism way too literally. And we saw in Silverstone, crazy defending. It's coming back again today. It's just not good enough. And for a guy of his experience in Formula One, you would expect better. And the spin, just to put a little cherry on top and what really seemed like it would be a great weekend, but has kind of been thrown down the drain. And I hope for himself and for his confidence, this really doesn't dent it, because he seemed like he was on such a high at the beginning of the weekend, but it really did just crumble in those latter stages. Williams, it's just nice to see that they're in that fight with those back two teams. Well, I don't think we saw them once, but last time out for the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, Latifi probably would have been my driver of the day if we'd have actually seen them and some of the onboards. If you haven't seen them, go over to F1's channel, top 10 onboards. Latifi just smashed it, overtaking 2 cars into cops, overtaking... I need to shut up about Latifi at the 70th anniversary, but it could well be. Some of these guys had some awesome moves, some awesome fights. They were all pretty much constantly changing position. It was just that we never really got to see any of them. Likewise with K-Mag, likewise with Giovinazzi. We did see Raikkonen early on in those first stages, that first stint, fighting with Ocon and Kvyat. That was quite fun to see Kimi really getting his elbows out at the start of this year. The first time we've really seen Kimi all year long this weekend. A great qualifying, again a good start to this race, but apart from that, disappointing certainly with Grosjean, but the rest of them, they've got poor machinery. They really need to hope. They were kind of probably hoping for rain, most of them, just something really out of the ordinary. It never came, and ultimately that back group all at the back. In front of that back group actually, and the only other team not to score points was Renault, which is kind of strange. They've been on such a good bounce of form. The Silverstone race were brilliant, the first one, the British Grand Prix. 70th anniversary Grand Prix, not so good, but Ocon scoring good points, and Ricciardo starting 5th in that race as well. But out in Q2, both cars, I kind of thought on the alternate strategy, starting on the mediums, they'd have a good shot at points, but Ocon got caught behind Raikkonen in those early stages, had some great fights, Esteban Ocon, again getting his elbows out, a little bit feisty, but it cost him so much time that he was never really in a position to fight for points. Ricciardo had a very quiet race, didn't really have the opportunity to overtake anyone. That Renault's pace just didn't really seem to be anywhere. Caught up with that group right at the end of the Grand Prix, that brilliant train behind Sebastian Vettel all the way down pretty much to Kvyat and Ocon. That was a great fight. But Ricciardo, just a quiet day. And again, in front of the big boss of the Renault group, of all the races to kind of end that good run of form, it's just a bit of karma, if you want to call it that, or sod's law, I think is a better way of saying it. But Renault, they've had a good couple of weekends. They've got a solid car, and I think it's going to be one of those things this year where there's always going to be one or two teams that are going to miss out on points. This weekend it's Renault, but next time, going to Spa, they seem to have quite a good car at high-speed circuits. Silverstone, the highest speed circuit we've been to so far, so they could spring a surprise there. But not the best result this time out. Danny Kvyat did split the two Renaults, and Gasly only just in front of that fight as well. So we'll talk about the two AlphaTauris together, but both of them once again in what I would class to be that car that's just in front of those back three teams, I think really outperforming it. Both of them putting in some fantastic overtakes. Danny Kvyat, I can't quite remember who the overtake was on. Was it on Sebastian Vettel or Charles Leclerc? It was really early on in the Grand Prix, around the outside of turn 4. He did it on Kimi Raikkonen this year. I think it was even cleaner this time around. But he just continues to be really solid, Danny Kvyat, but just continues to be outperformed by Pierre Gasly, and that must really wind him up. But Gasly, once again, really strong in qualifying, into Q3 again in the AlphaTauri, and in the race, I thought, to be honest, it was kind of a bit of a blessing in disguise for those outside the top 10, that with that tyre choice, they'd get in front of Norris, they'd get in front of Gasly, but all credit to Gasly, who was really punchy today. Likewise with Norris, both of them holding on and scoring points. Norris in P10, a quiet day, went backwards off the start, but involved in that big group, scoring a point. Yes, it drops him down a little bit in the standings, but again, continuing a really good qualifying record this year and a really good point streak. So fair play to Lando, not his best, but still, come home with a point. That's not horrific. Alex Albon, P8. I said I wanted to talk about Alex because he's such a pinnacle story at the moment, with everything that went on last year, with the Gasly and Albon swap, with Max Verstappen being as good as he is, second in the standings, second in the race today. It's so hard to judge how well Alex is doing, and a slightly uncharacteristic mistake from Red Bull, that we used to them being so good with strategy. The decision to put Albon on the hard tyres was an awful decision. Put him out in traffic, ice cold tyres for so long. Ended up going backwards at certain points. Had a great fight with Carlos Sainz, but Sainz eventually got through. Almost got overtaken by Gasly late on as well. Couldn't get past Sebastian Vettel, who one stopped. It was just a bit of a mess from Alex Albon. He did do some great overtakes, and he had to in those early stages on those hards if he wanted to get anywhere back near the front. But lapped by his teammate, you got a feel for the guy who did a great opening stint before he stopped, right there with the 2 racing points and not a million miles away from his teammate in the 2 Mercedes. 8th place though, not great, still holding on to 6th. Again, the fight is so tight in that midfield that he's only a few points off 4th in the standings, but I just wonder what could have been today if they just have been a little bit more sensible with that strategy. But I guess if it had worked out, maybe he could have picked the 2 racing points, but 8th, not too great. Sebastian Vettel, however, one in front of Alex Albon, P7, with Leclerc dropping out. I think a lot of people would have been surprised to see Vettel bring home a solid point score. He's not been on the best form this year, and that's an understatement for you. But it just seemed to really come together. There were arguments, once again, with the team that were playing this kind of weird strategic game where they weren't really forward planning, if that makes any kind of sense. They were asking Seb to kind of work on the fly, and I think what they were hoping for was rain. I think a lot of teams that were doing the 1 stop, or at least initially a 2 stop, converted to that 1 stop, hoping for rain, hoping to make a big jump, but the rain wasn't coming. The team weren't sure whether to pit Seb or not. They stayed out, and ultimately 7th place. Great haul of points, exactly what Vettel needs to start climbing the table. He's got a long way to go, but what a huge confident boost that is for him. And the official driver of the day as well, that's a real nice turnaround for Sebastian. Carlos Sainz, 6th place for McLaren. I think a really strong drive, actually. When you look at McLaren's pace all over the weekend, their long run pace in practice 2 and practice 3, qualifying pace, I think coming away in front of Albon, in front of the one-stopping Vettel, comfortably in front of his teammate, and just missing out on that 5th place of Sergio Perez with a penalty. I think it's a really good drive from Carlos Sainz. Some awesome overtakes. I said it earlier, a great fight with Alex Albon. One of my shouts for driver of the day, definitely. And he's a driver, a little bit like Vettel, who was going under the radar of having a disappointing season. But that's a big heap of points there today, and that, again, like Vettel, sorts him out a little bit nicer in those constructors' standings and drivers' standings as well. The 2 racing point cars, a quiet day Lance Stroll did the two-stop, did plan A, got in front of his teammate thanks to the penalty, had a little fight with his teammate at one stage. Perez, when he stopped for the first time, just caught up with his teammate, but Stroll defended well. Stroll had a fantastic start from 5th place, nipping up to 3rd in front of Valtteri Bottas. Another really good drive, and I do think people forget that Lance Stroll is the 2nd youngest driver on the grid. Norris is the youngest, then it's Lance Stroll, and the progression he's had, especially over the last 12 months since he's moved to Racing Point, when he's been alongside Sergio Perez, I think has been really, really impressive. And another really impressive drive today from the Canadian. Sergio Perez also, I think, was really impressive today, but got smacked about, like Danny Kvyat actually, with a 5-second penalty for ignoring blue flags. The footage we were shown, I think, is so harsh that he got a penalty. I really can't believe they've given him a penalty for that, but I do have that gut feeling that what we saw was not the full extent of the penalty, because he does move out the way on the straight, or at least slow down to let Hamilton, I think it was, through. There was no attempt to block Hamilton or anything like that. It was just very, very weird that they've decided to do this. It's so rare that we see penalties for ignoring blue flags. It's quite bizarre, is how I would phrase it. But still, 4th and 5th, great job for the team. And the top 3, Hamilton, class of his own, really impressive, as he always is in Spain. Crofty said it was his 7th Grand Slam. However, I don't think it is, because he didn't get fastest lap. So please let me know in the comments about that one. But I think he's still on 6, 1 off or 2 off Jim Clark's record. However, led every lap, pole position, race win, easy as you like. Max Verstappen came under threat from Bottas late on in the Grand Prix. Valtteri, who got a terrible start, not great at all, behind Lance Stroll, eventually got past, and what it seemed to be in the closing stages really seemed to find that bit of gusto, bit of mojo, and start catching Verstappen up, got the fastest lap, and then Mercedes stopped him for tyres to get the fastest lap, which I found a bit strange, to be totally honest. It kind of took away that last little bit of drama we were all holding on for, but it is what it is. 3rd place for Valtteri. It just surprised me, considering that he's technically lost 2 points. If he'd have at least gone for Max, still had the fastest lap, and suggests to me that he's maybe out of that title fight mindset already. Maybe it's a bit early to tell, but disappointing, I think, again behind Verstappen. Verstappen extending that lead in 2nd place, and Lewis Hamilton even further in front. But the top 3, class of their own. All of them were the only drivers that weren't lapped. I can see why people weren't megally impressed with today's race. But I do think that fight behind the top 3 was really, really good. And there were some great stories. But we do know, and we are used to with Spain, it's not the best track on the calendar. But Formula 2, which we'll get to in the F2 report in a little minute, wasn't too bad at all. And it suggests to me that sometimes the issues aren't with the circuit. I know Spain's not the best, but when you look at races in the past where we had smaller F1 cars, when you look at F2, I do think there's more of an issue than just blaming it all on the circuit de Barcelona, Catalonia. And right, before we go, we'll take a look at the drivers' standings. We'll then do our F2 report. A really, really fun weekend it was for F2 this time around. Driver of the day, race rating, and then we'll leave it there for 2 weeks before the Belgian Grand Prix. But your Drivers' Championship does indeed look like this. Lewis Hamilton extending that lead. 37 points over 2nd place Max Verstappen, who himself extends the lead. 6 points now in front of Valtteri Bottas. Bottas is going to have a great swing of points, great swing of momentum if he wants to get anywhere near this first title. Leclerc, no points today, but staying in P4. Lance Stroll nips up to P5 after today's fantastic result, his 2nd 4th place of the season, joint with Alex Albon. Norris slipped down to 7th after being in 4th just last weekend. Perez, Sainz, Ricciardo, your top 10. Sebastian Vettel, big points today, finally going up the leaderboard. 11th he is now, and just on level with Esteban Ocon, with Gasly just 2 points behind those two in P13. The Hulk, we miss him already. He's in 14th place on 6 points, so I think he'll still make it on our grid by the time we get to the end of the season. Kvyat and Magnussen have got 2 and 1 point each. Raikkonen, Latifi, Russell and Romain Grosjean yet to score. Grosjean, of course, not on the board in P21. Your team's championship, a slight change. Racing Point up to 3rd. They're just 1 point in front of McLaren, who themselves are 1 point in front of Ferrari. Renault, no points this time out, so drop a little bit further back. AlphaTauri get a couple, thanks to Gasly. Alfa Romeo on 2, Haas on 1, Williams yet to score. Before we get to driver of the day and race rating, it's time for your Formula 2 report for the Spanish Grand Prix. Another hugely impressive pole position for Callum Ilott on Friday put him in the driving seat for victory on the Sunday. However, a late safety car caused by contact with Sean Gelayo and Giuliano Alesi meant 18th place starter Nobuharu Matsushita won the feature race, the furthest back a driver has ever won the race from. Robert Schwartzman P2, Guan Yu Zhou a great drive through the field to finish off the podium. Tsunoda and Ilott your top 5. My driver of the day, of course, in the feature race, Matsushita. In the sprint race, it was Drugovich who took an early lead from 2nd on the grid. Giotto held on to P2 and Mick Schumacher claiming his 4th podium in F2, his 3rd of the season. Tsunoda 4th, Matsushita 5th, but after a massively impressive race in the sprint race, dominating victory and a strong race up until the safety car in the feature race, my driver of the weekend, Felipe Drugovich, and what's a surprise he's been this season. And after this weekend's Spanish Grand Prix, Callum Ilott extends his lead slightly over Robert Schwartzman. The gap between the two Ferrari juniors comfortable though, and can change next time out at Spa. Lundgaard, no points for him, slips back a little bit, is only 5 points now in front of Red Bull Yuki Tsunoda. Schumacher is up to P5, but look at those standings. Schumacher, even Tsunoda 82, down to Tipton on P10 on 63. It is so close. And in your rookie standing, Schwartzman leads 103, Christian Lundgaard 87 in P2. Formula 2 is back in 2 weeks' time for the Belgian Grand Prix, and just a quick get well soon to Sean Gelayo, who fractured his vertebrae during the feature race. Fingers crossed he'll be back racing in Spa. And finally, before we go, it's time for driver of the day and race rating. Driver of the day was actually quite tricky yesterday. I gave it to the Kimi Raikkonen, the Iceman himself. A great drive, but quiet race. I think the best two, and I feel really bad for Lance Stroll, it was really hard to pick. Sebastian Vettel on that one stop, the team just all over the place. I think was a really strong drive. And I was really impressed with Carlos Sainz today. Some of the moves he was making, how close he was for the 2 racing points and fighting Alex Albon, I was really impressed with. But Lance Stroll and Lewis Hamilton just on the outside bubble of driver of the day. But my F1E driver of the weekend, Lewis Hamilton. Pole position, led every lap, race win, how could I not? Just utterly dominant, just so close for that Grand Slam if he just nipped that fastest lap. And my race rating, I've gone with a 6 out of 10, which again I think a lot of people are going to disagree with, so I'd love to know your thoughts in that comment section down below. It was missing a lot. It would have been great for a fight at the front, and if the rain had come, it would have been a lot better. However, I really did enjoy that fight in the midfield. I was looking forward to seeing if Bottas could close in on Verstappen. There were so many different strategies at play. Vettel, how he was doing, Albon, his charge through the racing point. So I did quite enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. We're not talking a Germany 2019 or anything like that. But on the flip side, we're not talking about a Paul Ricard 2019. So I'd love to know your thoughts in that comment section down below. But that is it for your 2020 Formula 1 Spanish Grand Prix. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time for the Belgian Grand Prix, but don't worry, if you are new or if you're a loyal subscriber, over the next 2 weeks we'll be doing plenty of content. The mailbox is back on Wednesday. It's taken a bit of a hiatus, but that will be back. Plenty of Formula E stuff, wrapping up the season nicely. I'm looking forward to all of that and a few more surprises along the way. Thank you very much everyone for watching. If you are new, feel free to subscribe. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like. Thank you guys, and I hope to see you all in the next one.